The security guard's voice boomed over the hushed crowd. "Step aside now, or I'll call security." In that split second, the calm shattered, revealing a cascade of hidden secrets that would turn the night upside down. Before diving into this gripping tale, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more inspiring stories like this one. The mall shone under the glow of neon lights and the soft hum of evening activity, its polished floors reflecting 1,000 tiny sparks from the scattered bulbs overhead. The air was filled with the mingled scents of freshly brewed coffee, sweet baked goods, and a hint of rain that had just stopped outside. Every surface seemed to whisper stories of countless footsteps and hushed conversations. The steady murmur of background music, punctuated by the distant laughter of shoppers, created a tapestry of sound that was both comforting and subtly eerie. It was a place where every detail, from the cool touch of the marble banisters to the faint rustle of newspapers in a newsstand, wove together to form a living, breathing entity that held secrets beneath its gleaming surface. Darren walked his usual patrol route with a quiet determination, his footsteps measured and his eyes alert. Clad in a neatly pressed uniform that bore the emblem of his employer, he moved through the corridors of the mall like a silent guardian. Despite the steady rhythm of his routine, there was a weight in his chest, a blend of duty and a lingering uncertainty about the world he protected. Darren had grown up on the rougher edges of the city, where trust was scarce and loyalty was a commodity earned in hard-won moments. Tonight, as he observed the interplay of shadows and light dancing across the lobby, he couldn't shake a small, persistent feeling that the day's events were already whispering of change. At the security desk, near the main entrance, Darren exchanged a few quiet words with Lena, his longtime colleague and the one person whose steady presence grounded him amidst the chaos. Lena's warm smile and calm eyes had a way of easing the tension that often clung to the job. "Strange night, isn't it?" she remarked softly, glancing around as if the very walls might confide their secrets. Darren simply nodded, his gaze drifting over the crowd and lingering on the doorways where unknown stories were about to unfold. Lena, ever perceptive, knew that behind his controlled exterior lay a mind that was always questioning, always watching for the slightest hint of betrayal in a world that rarely offered loyalty without a price. It wasn't long before the day's rhythm was disrupted by the arrival of a young man whose presence seemed to challenge the very air of order. Andre entered the scene with a quiet confidence, his dark eyes and thoughtful expression setting him apart from the usual throng of shoppers. He moved with an almost deliberate grace, as if each step was measured against an inner score that only he could hear. Dressed in a simple but stylish outfit that hinted at both comfort and defiance, Andre's appearance was at once unassuming and intriguingly out of place in a setting defined by uniformity and routine. There was a subtle intensity in his gaze, a hint of secrets held close beneath a calm exterior, a secret that Darren felt prickle at the edge of his awareness. As Andre walked past the entrance, the tension in the air seemed to shift imperceptibly. Darren's eyes followed him, not with hostility, but with a cautious curiosity born of years of experience in a job that often demanded more than mere adherence to protocol. In the quiet moments between the steady pulse of the mall's life, Darren's mind wandered to the many encounters he had witnessed, moments of kindness, of unspoken understanding, and sometimes of unanticipated betrayal. Today, however, something about Andre stirred memories of past conflicts and hinted at a future fraught with unforeseen complications. Darren's inner dialogue was interrupted by Lena's soft voice as she continued to observe the unfolding scene from behind the security counter. "There's something about him," she said, her tone thoughtful yet edged with concern. "I can't tell if it's the way he carries himself or the look in his eyes. It feels like he's hiding something important." Darren offered a slight smile, appreciating her insight. "Maybe he is," he replied, his voice low and reflective, "or maybe he's just another soul looking for a safe place in a world that doesn't always understand." Their words hung in the air like a shared secret, a mutual acknowledgement that even in a place as bright and bustling as the mall, darkness could find a way to creep in. The soft clink of keys and the distant buzz of an intercom served as a gentle reminder of Darren's responsibilities. As he resumed his patrol, his eyes remained fixed on Andre, who now lingered near one of the boutique stores. Every movement, every glance between the two men was charged with an unspoken tension that neither fully understood. Darren remembered a time when he believed that following orders was enough, that the line between right and wrong was clearly drawn in black and white. Tonight, however, that line seemed blurred, and the memory of his own past, of decisions made in haste and moments of regret, echoed quietly in his mind. Around them, the mall continued its rhythmic dance of life. Shoppers ambled along the corridors, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding beneath the surface. The gentle hum of conversation mixed with the occasional announcement over the loudspeaker, a reminder of the ever-present order that the establishment sought to maintain. Yet in that order lay an undercurrent of tension, a feeling that the routine might be shattered by a single unexpected act. Darren felt it in the way his heartbeat quickened, in the prickling of his skin, as if a storm was gathering just beyond the polished glass doors. As the evening deepened, the subtle interplay of light and shadow began to reveal more than mere reflections on the floor. In quiet corners and along seldom-used corridors, whispers of old grudges and hidden resentments surfaced in Darren's mind. He recalled stories of trust broken and alliances betrayed, lessons learned the hard way by those who had once believed that order was synonymous with fairness. His eyes, ever watchful, missed little. Even the quiet determination in Andre's step suggested that the young man carried burdens that went far beyond the surface, a burdensome legacy that might one day collide with the rigid structures of authority. In one of the quieter recesses of the mall, where the hum of conversation softened into a contemplative silence, Darren found a moment of pause. He leaned against the cool metal of a service door, closing his eyes as he allowed the sensory tapestry around him to seep in fully. The faint scent of fresh paint and the underlying musk of the building itself mingled with the aroma of distant spices drifting from a nearby food court. In that brief interlude, his thoughts wandered to the nature of power and the often unseen forces that directed the flow of life within these walls. He wondered how many times he had enforced rules without questioning their origin, how many moments had passed without a second thought, only to return later with a pang of regret. Even as he pondered these reflections, subtle hints of something larger began to take shape. There was an undercurrent in the mall's operations, a silent, almost imperceptible hierarchy that extended far beyond the uniformed presence of security and the cheerful smiles of retail clerks. Darren had heard whispers of the owner, a man whose influence was as pervasive as it was mysterious. Though he rarely spoke of him openly, the name Victor was known among the staff, a name that carried weight and unspoken expectations. In the back of Darren's mind, the association of power and legacy stirred a quiet anxiety, a premonition that tonight might bring to light old secrets and new challenges. Andre's presence, too, carried echoes of this hidden order. The young man moved as if he was aware of forces beyond his control, a destiny shaped by legacy and expectation. There was something in the way his eyes occasionally darted to a closed door or lingered on a seemingly insignificant detail, as if he were piecing together a puzzle that the rest of the world was content to ignore. Darren's instinct told him that Andre was not just another customer, but a key that might unlock a narrative far more complex than the routine of daily security checks. The tension in the air grew thicker, a silent promise that the night would soon unfold in ways that defied expectations. Between his dutiful patrols and the quiet conversations with Lena, Darren began to sense that the evening was shifting. The mall, with its gleaming facades and meticulously maintained order, was on the brink of revealing layers that had long been hidden from plain sight. Every shadow, every soft murmur of the air conditioning seemed to hint at betrayals that were waiting to be uncovered. There was a delicate balance at play, a balance that, once disrupted, could unleash a cascade of events neither Darren nor anyone else could have foreseen. His heart beat faster at the thought, a mix of excitement and apprehension that blurred the line between duty and personal revelation. The conversation between Darren and Lena grew more introspective as they exchanged quiet remarks while monitoring the crowd. "Sometimes I wonder," Lena said, her voice soft yet edged with a hint of worry, "if enforcing the rules really keeps the peace or if it just hides the chaos beneath the surface." Darren's eyes drifted to the reflective glass of a storefront where the images of passers-by merged with the distorted reflections of his own face. "I think," he replied after a moment, "that sometimes we are the first line of defense, and sometimes we are the ones who let things slip through the cracks." His words carried a weight that resonated deeply in the silence between them, a recognition that even the most routine actions could have consequences far beyond the immediate moment. As the evening advanced, the subtle interplay of dialogue and unspoken thoughts wove together the threads of the unfolding story. Darren's gaze met Andre's several times, each fleeting encounter charged with a silent understanding of things left unsaid. There was no outright hostility in their looks, only a quiet recognition of differences and shared uncertainties. In one such moment, as Andre paused by a row of shop windows displaying shimmering jewelry, his eyes briefly locked with Darren's. For an instant, the bustling background of the mall faded away, leaving only the two of them suspended in a fragile, unspoken dialogue. In that look, Darren saw a glimmer of sorrow, a flicker of defiance, and something else, something that hinted at a betrayal yet to come. Every sound in the mall seemed to take on a deeper meaning as the hours slipped by. The soft patter of footsteps on the tiled floors, the rhythmic chime of the store doorbells, even the low hum of the ventilation system, all contributed to a growing sense of anticipation. Darren found himself reflecting on the delicate balance of his role, the need to uphold the rules while also grappling with the knowledge that sometimes rules were written by those who benefited from them most. The thought of Victor, the elusive mall owner whose name was spoken only in hushed tones, lingered in his mind like a dark secret waiting to emerge. Though Victor himself had not yet made an appearance, his presence was felt in every meticulously maintained corner of the mall, in every stern directive passed down to the staff. Darren couldn't help but wonder if the delicate equilibrium of order and chaos was maintained only by a web of hidden influences, each pulling its own strings behind the scenes. Even as Darren patrolled the corridors, the subtle cues of betrayal began to appear in the simplest of details. A misplaced object, a hushed conversation in a secluded corner, the flicker of guilt in a coworker's eyes. Lena, ever perceptive, remarked quietly to him, "There's more going on here than just the daily hum of business. Sometimes I think the mall itself is trying to tell us something." Darren only nodded, his thoughts swirling with questions about loyalty, power, and the quiet cost of blind obedience. He remembered past encounters where a single misstep had led to unforeseen consequences, where the enforcement of a rule had unveiled a cascade of hidden agendas. Tonight, with the unexpected arrival of Andre and the distant echo of Victor's influence, he sensed that the familiar routine was about to shatter in ways he could barely imagine. In the gentle interplay of light and shadow, as Darren walked past the ornate columns and the sleek glass partitions, the mall revealed itself as a character in its own right, a silent keeper of memories and secrets. The cool air that brushed against his skin carried whispers of old stories, of promises made and broken in the pursuit of order. Every surface, every reflective panel, seemed to hold a fragment of the past, waiting for the right moment to cast its light on the present. Darren's mind, ever restless, filled with images of long-forgotten betrayals and subtle acts of defiance that had shaped the very foundations of the place he now guarded. Andre, for his part, continued to move through the space with an air of quiet determination. His presence was a blend of vulnerability and strength, a mixture that defied the expectations of those who would judge him by mere appearances. Even as he navigated the maze of stores and corridors, there was a sense of purpose in his every step, a silent drive that hinted at a personal journey fraught with obstacles and revelations. Though the reasons behind his demeanor remained locked away in the depths of his guarded heart, Darren could not ignore the feeling that Andre was more than a chance encounter, that his fate was intricately tied to the fate of this very mall. In a moment of quiet reflection near one of the less frequented entrances, Darren paused to gather his thoughts. The soft glow of a nearby exit sign illuminated the worn texture of the concrete wall, and in that light, he saw the lines of fatigue and worry etched on his own face. It was a look that spoke of years spent grappling with the dual demands of duty and conscience, a burden that weighed heavily on him as much as the uniform did. What would you do, he thought silently, if every rule you enforced turned out to hide a deeper truth? The question echoed in his mind, mingling with the ambient sounds of the mall and the distant, rhythmic footsteps of a line shopper. It was a thought that made him shiver, as if he were standing on the edge of an abyss he was both drawn to and afraid of. The stage was now set for a night that promised to challenge everything Darren had believed about his role, about trust, and about the fragile boundaries that separated order from chaos. With every step he took, the mall seemed to pulse with anticipation, as though it knew that soon the hidden layers of loyalty and betrayal would be laid bare. The soft, persistent hum of the ventilation and the gentle murmur of distant conversations served as a constant reminder that even in a place defined by order, secrets could lurk in every corner, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In the dim corridors and quiet recesses of the sprawling complex, the interplay of duty and destiny began to take shape. Darren's mind, filled with reflections on the nature of power and the quiet cost of unquestioned obedience, could not help but dwell on the silent presence of a man named Victor, a name that whispered through the halls like a ghostly reminder of a legacy built on control and hidden influence. Though Victor had yet to step into the light, his shadow loomed large over the everyday lives of those who worked within these walls, hinting at an intricate web of power that could be both protective and destructive. As the night deepened and the soft glow of the mall's lights melded with the natural darkness outside, the stage was quietly set for events that would upend the established order. Darren's heart beat steadily as he resumed his patrol, his senses heightened to every sound and movement. The unresolved questions, the whispered secrets, and the faint, almost imperceptible signs of betrayal coalesced into a quiet tension that promised to erupt at any moment. In that charged atmosphere, every step, every breath, was a reminder that the truth was often hidden beneath layers of routine and expectation. The evening wore on with an almost hypnotic persistence, the steady flow of shoppers and the soft cadence of background music forming a rhythm that both comforted and unsettled Darren. He moved through the familiar paths with a sense of both duty and foreboding, aware that tonight was different from any other. The routine of his job, once a source of stability, now felt like a fragile barrier against the chaos that threatened to seep in from the shadows. And as he glanced once more in the direction of Andre, who now seemed to stand quietly by a display window, lost in thought, Darren couldn't help but wonder if that young man carried the key to unlocking secrets that would forever change the course of their lives. In that lingering moment, the mall itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the inevitable collision of lives and destinies. Every sensory detail, the cool caress of the air, the soft murmur of voices, the intricate interplay of light and dark, conspired to create a setting where nothing was as it appeared. The subtle hints of betrayal, the undercurrent of hidden motives, and the quiet, powerful presence of names like Victor and Andre set the stage for a night of revelations. Darren felt it deep in his bones, a premonition that the fragile equilibrium he had maintained for so long was about to be shattered by events that would force him to confront not only his own beliefs, but also the very foundations of trust and loyalty. As the first act of the evening drew to a close, the mall transformed from a place of routine order into a crucible of potential change. Darren's eyes, reflecting the myriad lights of the corridors, held a mixture of resolve and apprehension. The soft echo of his footsteps on the tile floor was a steady reminder of the duty he carried, yet it was now accompanied by the unspoken promise that nothing would ever remain unchanged. In the delicate balance between the familiar and the unforeseen, the seeds of betrayal and revelation had been sown, their roots stretching deep into the fabric of the mall's existence. Without a word, Darren continued his patrol, each step marking the passage of time and the approach of a new, uncertain chapter. The night was far from over, and in its quiet, measured rhythm lay the potential for moments that would challenge every assumption. For now, The mall remained a silent witness to the unfolding drama, a place where every reflection told a story and every shadow hinted at truths yet to be revealed. And as Darren's gaze wandered once more toward the figure of Andre, a quiet determination welled up inside him, an unspoken vow that no matter what secrets emerged, he would stand at the crossroads of duty and conscience, ready to face the consequences of a world where trust was as fragile as the light that danced on the polished floors. In that long, lingering pause before the inevitable storm, the mall breathed a silent promise of change. The mingling scents, the soft echoes of voices, and the interplay of light and dark all spoke of a night that would test the boundaries of loyalty, challenge the comfort of routine, and reveal the hidden truths that lay beneath every polished surface. And so, as the hours slowly passed, the stage was set, a delicate yet unyielding balance between the known and the unknown, between duty and destiny, between the trust placed in each other and the betrayals waiting in the wings. Darren's heart, steady yet filled with a quiet storm of thoughts, kept pace with the subtle shifts in the air. It was a night like no other, where every detail was charged with meaning and every glance could be the harbinger of a secret too long concealed. The mall, with its brilliant lights and hidden shadows, was not just a building. It was a living narrative, a tapestry of intertwined fates that promised that the story was only just beginning. And in that moment, as the soft sounds of the night mingled with the steady beat of his own heart, Darren realized that the boundaries between right and wrong, between loyalty and betrayal, were as fluid and unpredictable as the shifting patterns of light on the polished floors. With every step he took along the familiar corridors, Darren carried not only the weight of his uniform, but also the burden of questions that would soon demand answers. The night stretched before him like an unwritten page, full of promise, peril, and the quiet hope that in the end, truth and loyalty might somehow find a way to prevail, even in a world where every secret had its price. Darren's unease had deepened into a simmering anxiety as the night wore on. The mall's familiar corridors now pulsed with a charged energy that hinted at impending chaos. Earlier, the day had passed in a measured rhythm of routine patrols and subdued conversations with Lena, but now every step, every murmur of the crowd carried a sense of foreboding. Darren's thoughts raced as he recalled the subtle warnings he had picked up earlier, the furtive glances exchanged between certain shoppers, the hushed whispers that seemed to float in the air like invisible threats. It was as if the mall, with all its gleaming surfaces and orchestrated order, had suddenly become a stage for a drama that was about to unfold in unexpected and painful ways. As he rounded a corner near a cluster of boutique shops, Darren noticed a disturbance near the entrance of a small electronics store. A group of customers had gathered, their faces a mixture of shock and indignation. At the center of the commotion stood Andre, his posture defiant, yet laced with an unmistakable vulnerability. The young man's eyes, dark and reflective, darted around as if searching for an ally in the midst of mounting hostility. The murmurs grew louder, punctuated by sharp exclamations and disapproving whispers. Some onlookers pointed accusing fingers, while others simply stared, caught in the gravity of the moment. In that charged instant, Darren felt a pull in his chest, a collision of duty and a personal reluctance that churned within him. He had seen Andre before, had watched him move through the mall with a quiet determination that belied the turmoil in his gaze. But now, faced with the rising clamor and the palpable tension, Darren found himself caught in the crossfire of conflicting loyalties. A stern voice over the intercom, cold and uncompromising, echoed from the security office, a directive to restore order by removing the disruptive presence. Darren's heart sank. The order was clear, but so was the unmistakable signal that something was amiss. Stepping forward, Darren approached the escalating scene. His uniform, once a symbol of steadfast protection, now felt like an iron shackle as he neared Andre. "Sir, I need you to step away from the door," Darren said in a measured tone, though his words trembled with internal conflict. Andre's eyes flashed with a mixture of defiance and hurt as he responded, "Why? I haven't done anything wrong." His voice, steady yet laced with emotion, cut through the murmur of the crowd. In that moment, the air between them thickened with a tension that seemed to mirror the weight of unspoken histories. Lena, stationed at the counter, exchanged a worried glance with Darren. Her eyes pleaded silently for him to reconsider, to see the humanity in the young man before him. But the order was clear, and the room seemed to close in with an oppressive insistence on conformity. Darren's internal monologue roiled with memories of past injustices and the inherent cruelty of rules that sometimes mask deeper prejudices. What if I'm wrong about this, he wondered, his heart aching with the possibility that the very order he was sworn to enforce might be the instrument of betrayal. His mind flashed to the name Victor, a name that carried a heavy legacy and whispered of unspoken alliances and hidden agendas. Victor, the elusive owner of them all, whose influence was felt in every directive and whose silence often spoke louder than any reprimand. The tension snapped when a sharp shot rang out from behind the crowd. "He's causing trouble," cried a man whose tone carried a bitter edge of accusation. Suddenly, voices merged into a chaotic chorus of condemnation, and in the ensuing uproar, a security colleague stepped forward with an air of rigid certainty. "Sir, I need you to leave this area immediately," the colleague insisted, his words echoing the unyielding tone of authority that had become all too familiar in these halls. Darren's gaze flickered between the official's stern expression and Andre's imploring eyes. In that fleeting moment, he hesitated, a crack in the unbending facade of duty. The conflict escalated rapidly. Andre's voice rose in a crescendo of frustration. "I'm not the enemy here," he shouted, his tone imbued with raw emotion. His words reverberated off the polished walls, stirring a murmur among the gathered crowd. Darren felt the weight of every eye upon him, and in the heavy silence that followed, a single wrenching thought took hold. What if enforcing this order meant betraying his own moral compass? Amid the swirling chaos, Darren's inner voice challenged him. "Is this what you truly believe in? Is it right to cast someone out based solely on what you're told, without understanding the full picture?" The question echoed in his mind as he advanced slowly toward Andre. His tone softened ever so slightly. "Andre, I'm not here to harm you. I'm just following orders." But his words, though calm, carried an undercurrent of sorrow and regret. The crowd's tension thickened into palpable hostility, and Darren felt the first pricklings of doubt about the very orders he had received. In a sudden, heart-wrenching turn, the tension reached its peak. A bystander, voice quivering with anger, hurled an accusation that shattered the fragile equilibrium. "He's a troublemaker. I've seen him before causing issues." The words, laced with prejudice, sliced through the already fragile air, and for a split second, it seemed as though every latent bias in the room had found its voice. Andre's eyes widened in disbelief, and Darren felt an overwhelming surge of regret as he realized that the situation was spiraling far beyond a simple breach of protocol. Darren's hand trembled as he reached for his radio, his internal battle raging louder than the clamor of the crowd. "Control, I need clarification. This isn't right," he murmured into the device, his voice barely audible over the rising uproar. The static on the other end offered no solace, only reinforcing the cold, impersonal nature of the orders he was bound to follow. His gaze shifted to Lena, whose worried expression mirrored his own turmoil. In that silent exchange, an unspoken plea passed between them. For understanding, for compassion, and for the courage to defy an order that seemed steeped in injustice. As the confrontation intensified, the unmistakable presence of betrayal began to reveal itself. A familiar figure stepped from the shadows, a man whose reputation for impartiality had long been an anchor in the tumultuous world of mall security. It was Martin, the floor supervisor known for his strict adherence to protocol. But tonight, Martin's eyes were narrowed with a personal vendetta that belied his normally calm demeanor. "Darren, do what you're told," Martin barked, his voice leaving no room for argument. His tone carried an edge of something darker, as though this was not merely about maintaining order, but about settling scores that ran deeper than the surface conflicts of a single night. Darren's heart pounded in his ears as he found himself trapped between Martin's unyielding authority and his own gnawing doubts. I I have to, Darren stammered, his voice thick with conflicted emotion. With a heavy heart, he took a step forward and, with measured yet firm resolve, ordered, Andre, you need to leave the mall immediately. The command, delivered with the precision of duty, landed like a blow in the charged silence that followed. Andre's eyes filled with hurt and disbelief as he slowly began to gather his belongings, his every movement a silent protest against the injustice of the moment. Please, Andre pleaded, his voice breaking with a mixture of anger and sorrow. I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just want to be left alone. His words, earnest and raw, seemed to hang in the air like a fragile plea for understanding. But the order was absolute, and the rigid enforcement of protocol left no space for exceptions. As Andre turned to leave, his gaze met Darren's one last time, a look that was both accusatory and filled with an aching sadness. It was a moment that seared itself into Darren's memory, a silent testimony to the betrayal of trust that was unfolding before him. For a heartbeat, the mall fell into a heavy, oppressive silence, as if the very air mourned the loss of what could have been understood. Then, as if a dam had burst, the tension exploded into a cascade of consequences. Shouts of disapproval, cries of protest, and murmurs of indignation surged through the crowd. Darren's chest tightened with regret, and he felt as though the walls themselves were closing in, condemning him to a fate that he had never truly chosen. The internal storm of guilt and confusion raged as he watched Andre's retreating figure disappear into the night. In the ensuing chaos, Lena rushed to Darren's side. Darren, what have you done? She whispered urgently, her eyes brimming with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. Her voice was both a question and an accusation, echoing the sentiment that had begun to ripple through them all, a sentiment that questioned whether the enforcement of rules had crossed the line into cruelty. Darren's own eyes filled with tears he could not suppress. I was following orders, he replied, his voice hoarse and uncertain. But now, I'm not so sure. The admission hung between them like a fragile confession, as both realized that the night had taken a turn that none of them had anticipated. It was in that moment of shared vulnerability that the true nature of betrayal began to reveal itself. From behind a polished set of double doors emerged Victor, the enigmatic owner whose name had long been spoken in whispers among the staff. His presence was magnetic and commanding, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of fury and profound disappointment. The crowd parted like the sea as he advanced, his footsteps measured and deliberate. What is the meaning of this? Victor demanded, his voice resonant and echoing with authority that brooked no opposition. His gaze, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Darren as if seeking an explanation that could justify the unfolding events. The arrival of Victor transformed the charged atmosphere into something almost unbearable. The assembled shoppers and staff fell into a hush, their collective attention riveted on the confrontation at its epicenter. Lena's eyes widened in alarm, while Darren felt the full weight of his actions crashing down upon him. In that charged silence, Victor's words cut through the tension like a knife. I have always believed in upholding the dignity of this mall, in treating every individual with respect, he intoned, his tone measured but laced with an underlying threat. Yet tonight, I see that our values have been compromised. His eyes swept over the crowd and finally settled on Darren, who stood rooted to the spot, torn between duty and remorse. A ripple of shock passed through the onlookers as Victor's next words revealed a twist that no one had expected. Andre is not just any customer, he declared, his voice rising with a mix of anger and disbelief. He is my son. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Gasps and murmurs of astonishment erupted in the silent space where moments before only tension reigned. Darren's heart lurched, and for a long moment, time seemed to slow as he tried to process the magnitude of what had just been revealed. In that single sentence lay the key to a betrayal that transcended simple mistakes of judgment. It was a moment where personal history and institutional power collided in a way that would forever alter the course of their lives. The implications of Victor's words reverberated through the room. Andre, who had already been on the verge of disappearing into the night, turned slowly back towards the crowd. His eyes, previously brimming with a quiet defiance, now shone with a mixture of relief and sorrow, a silent testament to the burden he had carried all along. For Darren, the revelation was a searing indictment of the very system he had upheld. Every fiber of his being screamed in protest as he realized that his own actions that had been dictated by orders steeped in prejudice, had caused immeasurable harm to someone so deeply connected to the power that governed this entire world. The shock in the room was palpable. "My son," Victor repeated, his voice trembling between fury and heartbreak. "How could you let this happen?" His words, aimed as much at Darren as at the unseen forces behind the decision, seemed to demand accountability for a betrayal that was as personal as it was systemic. In that charged moment, the dynamics of power shifted once again. Darren's own resolve wavered, and a torrent of conflicting emotions surged within him: guilt, regret, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. He had always believed in the clarity of duty, in the righteousness of following orders, but now he found himself questioning whether those orders were truly just. Lena reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed against Darren's arm. "Darren," she murmured softly, "what will you do now?" Her question was not just a plea for an explanation. It was an invitation to reflect on the nature of loyalty and the consequences of blind obedience. Darren's eyes met hers, and in that silent exchange, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "I thought I was protecting them all, but instead, I've hurt someone who deserves respect." His words, laced with anguish, echoed in the charged air as the crowd looked on in a mixture of shock and sympathy. The intensity of the moment deepened as murmurs of discontent and introspective questions rippled through the onlookers. "What would you do if you were in Darren's place?" The silent narrative seemed to ask, inviting each person present to confront their own beliefs about duty, loyalty, and the fine line between right and wrong. For a few agonizing moments, the mall's polished surfaces and neon lights faded into insignificance, replaced by the raw human drama unfolding before them. A drama where the stakes were nothing less than the soul of an institution built on order, trust, and respect. Amid the swirling emotions, Victor's gaze softened ever so slightly as he looked upon his son. "Andre," he said, gently, "I never wanted you to suffer like this." His tone, though heavy with disappointment, held a note of paternal sorrow that transcended the anger of the moment. Andre's eyes, glistening with unshed tears, met his father's, a silent exchange that spoke of years of hidden pain, of a legacy burdened by expectation and the unyielding demands of power. The revelation had cast everything in a new light, exposing not only the personal failings of those involved, but also the deep fractures within the system itself. In that heart-wrenching pause, Darren felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted irreversibly. The very act of enforcing an order, a seemingly mundane duty, had erupted. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else, his voice cracking under the weight of his remorse. The words, simple and fraught with regret, seemed inadequate in the face of the betrayal that had unfolded. They hung in the air, mingling with the collective sorrow of those who had borne witness to the unraveling of trust. The room remained suspended in a charged stillness as Victor's expression hardened once more. "This mall," he declared, his tone both resolute and sorrowful, "stands for more than just rules and orders. It stands for the values we must uphold, values of dignity, respect, and truth." His words, intended as both admonition and a call to action, resonated deeply with the assembled crowd. In that moment, the mall's polished floors and bright lights took on a symbolic weight, a reminder that beneath the surface of order lay the fragile human emotions that could so easily be betrayed by power. As the tension slowly began to ebb, Darren found himself at a crossroads. The choices he had made that night would forever haunt him, a bitter reminder of the price of unquestioning obedience. He looked at Lena, whose eyes mirrored the same conflicted anguish that churned within him, and silently vowed that he would seek redemption for his actions. The betrayal he had unwittingly committed was not one that could be easily forgiven, but it was also not one that he was destined to repeat. In the aftermath of the explosive revelation, the mall seemed to exhale a collective sigh, a temporary release of the pent-up emotions that had built up over the long, harrowing night. Shoppers resumed their movements, albeit with a lingering air of uncertainty, and the normal hum of commerce tentatively returned as if to cover up the scars of the confrontation. Yet for Darren, Lena, Andre, and even Victor, nothing would ever be the same again. Darren's mind swirled with introspective questions as he resumed his patrol, the weight of every step a reminder of the choices he had made. What does loyalty mean when duty and compassion collide? He pondered silently, his heart heavy with the burden of regret. The mall, once a sanctuary of order, now revealed itself as a battleground of conflicting values, a place where every polished surface concealed hidden wounds and every shadow echoed with the pain of betrayal. As the hours crept on, whispers of the night's events spread quietly among the staff and shoppers. Some looked at Darren with pity, others with barely concealed anger, while a few exchanged knowing glances, as if silently acknowledging the deeper corruption that had infiltrated the institution they all depended on. Lena stayed close by Darren's side, her presence a small but steadfast beacon of hope amid the lingering darkness of that fateful night. "We must do better," she said softly as they passed a quiet corridor, her voice carrying both determination and sorrow. "We have to find a way to restore the trust that's been broken." Darren only nodded, the silent promise in his eyes speaking volumes about his commitment to change. The mall's ambient noise, the distant chime of a clock, the hum of an air conditioner, took on a new melancholic resonance as Darren's thoughts drifted back to that pivotal moment. Each echo in the corridor was a reminder of the fragile line between order and chaos, between the safe veneer of routine and the harsh reality of human fallibility. And as he walked, Darren couldn't help but wonder, if one act of blind obedience could lead to such profound betrayal, what other hidden injustices lay waiting in the shadows of a system built on unquestioned rules? The night eventually gave way to a somber pre-dawn quiet. The earlier tumult had not yet faded completely, and the repercussions of the confrontation continued to ripple through the hearts of all who had witnessed it. Darren found himself in a quiet corner of the mall, away from the fading crowd, grappling with the enormity of his actions. The weight of regret pressed upon him as he replayed the events over and over, each moment a stark reminder that sometimes the line between right and wrong was blurred by the pressures of duty and the expectations of authority. In that reflective solitude, a small, resolute spark of determination began to kindle within Darren. He knew that redemption would not come easily, nor would the wounds inflicted that night heal without significant change. Yet, as he stared into the quiet darkness, he silently vowed to himself that he would seek a path toward restoring the dignity that had been lost. He would question the orders that had once seemed infallible and strive to ensure that every person under his watch was treated with the respect they deserved. And so, as the first light of dawn began to seep through the high windows of the mall, Darren took a deep, shuddering breath. The night had been long and filled with betrayals that cut deeper than any blade, yet in its wake lay the potential for a new beginning, a chance to rebuild trust and to redefine what it meant to truly serve and protect. In that fragile moment between night and day, as the mall slowly stirred back to life, Darren's internal voice whispered a final reflective question. What would you do when the cost of loyalty demands that you stand for something greater than the rules? In that quiet, vulnerable dawn, the mall was no longer just a building of glass and steel. It was a testament to the enduring struggle between power and compassion, between blind obedience and moral courage. And as Darren stepped out from his solitude, resolved to face the consequences of his actions and to forge a path toward redemption, the silent promise of change echoed in every corner of that once familiar place. A promise that even the deepest betrayals might someday give way to a more honest, humane future. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the tall glass windows of the mall, the charged atmosphere from the previous night had not yet dissipated. Instead, it had taken on a weightier, almost tangible form. The early morning light fell on the polished floors and reflective surfaces, revealing not just the physical space, but also the raw emotions etched into every face that still lingered in the corridors. Darren stood near a quiet alcove, his heart still pounding from the revelations of the night before. Every step he had taken, every order followed, now reverberated within him like the echo of a distant, unyielding truth. In the hushed hours before the mall would stir with the routine of a new day, a small group of those involved gathered in a secluded break room, a space that had once offered brief respite from the constant hum of the establishment. Here, the tension among them was almost palpable. Lena's eyes, still damp with unshed tears, met Darren's as if silently asking for an explanation he himself was struggling to find. Andre, his expression a mix of vulnerability and defiant resolve, sat apart yet close enough to be part of the unfolding dialogue. And Victor, his imposing figure softened only slightly by the fatigue of unspoken regrets, stood with a rigid posture that betrayed the internal conflict tearing at him. The silence in the room stretched for long moments before Darren finally spoke, his voice wavering but determined. "I have been following orders all my life," he began, his tone low and heavy with remorse. "But last night, when I was told to remove you, Andre, without knowing the truth behind it, I realized I had become a part of something far darker than I ever imagined." His words hung in the air, mingling with the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of cleaning carts moving in the background. Victor's eyes narrowed as he listened. The man who had once seemed so untouchable, so certain of the rules that governed his domain, now looked as if the weight of his decisions pressed upon him. "Darren," he said slowly, "our roles have been clearly defined for a long time. I gave the orders because I believed that maintaining order was the only way to protect everything we hold dear." His voice, though measured, trembled with a mix of authority and the dawning realization that his actions had unintended consequences. Andre, whose presence had transformed from that of a silent onlooker to a man burdened with the scars of unacknowledged truths, leaned forward. "I have lived in the shadows of these walls all my life," he said, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "I never asked to be hidden away, to be treated as an inconvenience. I just wanted to be seen as a person, not as a troublemaker defined by others' prejudices." His words were a plea for understanding, a call to see beyond the rigid boundaries of duty and authority. The room fell silent again as Lena interjected softly. "Every one of us is trapped by expectations, by orders, by roles we never chose. And in our blind obedience, we sometimes forget that behind every rule lies a human story." Her words, spoken with quiet conviction, resonated with each person present, their meaning seeping into the very walls of the room as if challenging them to reconsider what truly mattered. It was then that Martin, the supervisor whose earlier actions had contributed to the cascade of events, stepped forward from the shadows of the doorway. His usual stern demeanor was replaced by a look of profound regret. "I thought I was doing what was right," he admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt. "I was so caught up in maintaining the image of order that I ignored the voices that spoke of injustice. I see now that our system has failed us all." His admission, coming from a man once so resolute, deepened the collective sense of shared betrayal and loss. The conversation that followed was not one of simple accusations, but of desperate attempts to piece together the shattered fragments of trust. Darren's eyes, once clouded by duty, now shone with a fierce determination to reclaim his humanity. "I can't undo what has been done," he said, "but I can try to make it right. The orders I followed were not enough justification for the harm that was caused. We need to start questioning the system that forces us to choose between loyalty to the rules and loyalty to our own moral compass." His words, raw and unfiltered, challenged the very foundation of the power structures that had governed their lives. Victor's face, weathered by years of unchallenged authority, softened as he listened. The anger that had once defined his responses gave way to a quiet, reflective sorrow. I built this mall as a symbol of progress and order, he murmured, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the people it was meant to serve. I see now that my actions have hurt those I love the most, even if I never intended for it to happen. His confession was not a surrender, but a painful acknowledgement of his own failings, a turning point that signaled the beginning of change. In that charged atmosphere, the convergence of betrayal and redemption reached its peak. The room, filled with people who had been both pawns and reluctant enforcers in a system riddled with hidden biases, became a crucible where truth was forged in the fires of regret and resolve. Lena's voice, soft yet unwavering, broke the silence once more. We all have a role to play in shaping what comes next. The question isn't whether we follow orders, it's whether we have the courage to question them when they no longer serve justice. The impact of her words was immediate. In that moment, each person in the room felt the stirring of a possibility, a chance to rebuild not just the broken trust between them, but the very fabric of the institution that had once defined them. Darren looked at Andre, whose eyes were now filled not just with pain, but with a glimmer of hope. Andre, he said, his tone gentle yet resolute, I cannot change the past, but I promise that from now on I will stand by what is right, not just what is expected of me. The promise in his voice was a beacon in the dim light of early morning, a vow to honor the dignity of every human being within these walls. Victor, whose authoritative posture had begun to crumble under the weight of his own conscience, took a step toward Darren. I entrusted you with the safety of this mall because I believed in your commitment, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, I see that true safety comes not from blind obedience, but from understanding and compassion. I have been the architect of a system that dehumanized us all, and for that I must atone. His words, though fraught with regret, opened a door to reconciliation, a possibility that even the deepest betrayals could lead to profound transformation. As the sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the room and the mall beyond, the final vestiges of tension began to ease. The conversation shifted from accusations to plans for change. Lena suggested a new set of guidelines, one that would prioritize empathy over rigid control. Martin, humbled by his own shortcomings, vowed to monitor these changes with fairness and transparency. And Darren, still grappling with the scars of his own actions, resolved to be a champion of a system that valued human connection over mechanical enforcement. In the midst of these pledges for change, a sudden commotion from outside shattered the fragile calm. A group of early arriving staff and a few concerned shoppers had gathered near the main entrance, their voices rising in a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Darren stepped out to see what was amiss, and as he did, he found that the night's events had already begun to ripple beyond the confines of the break room. In the crowd, he saw faces that reflected not only confusion and anger, but also a deep-seated desire for accountability. It was as if the very community that had been subject to the harsh measures of the previous night was now demanding a new way forward, a way that recognized the dignity of every individual. Darren addressed the small gathering with the same honesty that had characterized his confession moments earlier. We have all been part of something that has hurt us, he said, his voice resonating with genuine sorrow and newfound resolve. But this hurt can be the beginning of a change. I ask each of you to reflect on what you have witnessed and to join us in forging a future where loyalty is measured not by adherence to flawed orders, but by our commitment to fairness and compassion. His words, simple and direct, were like a call to arms, a call to rebuild a community founded on trust rather than fear. As he spoke, the atmosphere among the onlookers began to shift. The initial shock of betrayal gave way to murmurs of agreement, and slowly the crowd transformed into a collective of voices yearning for reform. Among them, a few stepped forward, echoing Darren's sentiment and adding their own stories of quiet suffering under the weight of an uncaring system. Their testimonies, raw and unpolished, painted a picture of a community ready to rise above the constraints of outdated protocols and prejudices. In the following hours, as the mall slowly came to life under the new light of day, the decisions made in that humble break room began to take shape. A committee was formed, comprising representatives from every level of the establishment, from security to management, and even including voices from the shoppers themselves. Their task was to dismantle the old order, to question every rule that had been accepted without thought, and to build a new framework founded on mutual respect and accountability. For Darren, the transformation was deeply personal. The regret of his past actions was tempered by the hope that emerged from this collective determination. He took it upon himself to lead by example, seeking out opportunities to mend the fractures that had formed between him and those he had once seen only as part of the crowd. In conversations with both colleagues and customers, he strove to listen, to understand, and to offer apologies where they were due. His journey from a man bound by duty to one guided by conscience was a slow and painful one, but every step forward was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As the day unfolded, the mall itself seemed to change. The sterile glow of fluorescent lights gave way to a softer, more welcoming ambience, and even the sound of footsteps on the tiled floors carried a note of cautious optimism. The transformation was not instantaneous, and scars of the past would remain, but in every interaction, there was a renewed sense of possibility, a chance for healing, and a promise that the lessons of betrayal and redemption would not be forgotten. Later that afternoon, as the committee met in a refurbished conference room overlooking the bustling central atrium, the conversation turned to the deeper questions that had haunted them all. "What does it mean to be truly loyal?" asked one representative, her voice steady yet inquisitive. "Is it loyalty to a set of rules, or to the values that those rules are meant to uphold?" The question, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with everyone present. It was a reminder that loyalty without understanding could easily become a tool of oppression, while true loyalty required courage, the courage to question authority, to stand up against injustice, and to extend empathy even in the face of betrayal. As the meeting drew to a close, Darren found himself alone for a moment in the quiet hallway outside the conference room. The events of the past few hours played over in his mind like a montage of moments that had reshaped his understanding of right and wrong. He recalled the pained expression on Andre's face when he had been forced to leave, the hard lines of regret on Lena's features, and even Victor's own slow, reluctant admission of his failings. In that reflective solitude, Darren realized that the true climax of their story was not marked by a single dramatic confrontation, but by the gradual, painful unraveling of a system that had long been taken for granted. In the final moments of that day, as the mall's corridors quieted and the rush of activity slowed to a gentle murmur, Darren addressed the space around him in a quiet internal monologue. "We have all been part of a betrayal, not just of one another, but of the very ideals we claim to hold dear. But in our willingness to face that betrayal, to admit our mistakes, there is hope. Hope that tomorrow we will build something better, something more just." His thoughts were a mixture of sorrow and resolve, a recognition that healing would be a long process, but that every small step mattered. Before Darren left for the day, he paused in the central atrium where a mosaic of faces, staff, shoppers, and even passers-by formed an impromptu tapestry of human connection. He turned his gaze outward, as if addressing not just those present, but an unseen audience beyond the polished glass and tiled floors. "This is not the end of our story," he said softly, his voice carrying over the quiet space. "It is an invitation, a call to reflect on what we value in our lives and in our communities. In the face of betrayal, in the midst of shattered trust, there is always a chance to rebuild. I ask you all, share your thoughts, and let us remember that every act of kindness, every moment of honest reflection, brings us one step closer to the world we want to live in." What would you do if you found yourself at the crossroads of duty and compassion? In that final, resonant question lay the heart of their collective journey. The mall, once a symbol of cold order and unyielding rules, had become a living testament to the power of redemption and the fragile, yet enduring nature of human connection. As Darren stepped out into the bright light of a late afternoon, leaving behind the echoes of the past and the promise of a better future, he carried with him the deep, unspoken hope that the scars of betrayal would someday give way to the healing touch of understanding, and that every person, regardless of the roles they played, could be a catalyst for true change. And so, as the day drew to a close and the last of the sunlight faded from the windows of the once familiar mall, the story of betrayal and redemption remained etched in the hearts of all who had been a part of it. It was a story that invited reflection, challenged assumptions, and called upon each of us to examine the cost of loyalty and the price of obedience. In that quiet, fading light, the question lingered: in a world where trust is so easily broken, how will you choose to stand for what is right? Share your thoughts and consider this. What would you have done in that moment of betrayal?